post.
Yeah.
That's really nice.
Yeah.
Okay, this is on. You have to hit go live. Oh, okay.
Oh, I can hear just a little, I think. Thanks. And set the agenda and everything. I thought since we have some new members, I know we kind of informally did introductions, but just so everybody can officially meet each other, maybe we could just start by going down the line and
Sure.
introducing ourselves.
Yeah. My name is Sarah Vingo. I'm relatively new to the board as well. So,
Yeah, I'm Jennifer Fortenberry, and I joined this time last year.
That went by fast.
I know, seriously,
Wow.
yeah.
I'm Carter.
So we have two student members.
Okay.
Who are high school students, and so Carter is one of those, and then
Claire?
Claire,
Yeah,
yes, thank you, the name just evaporated.
she's always sitting right here.
Yeah, and Claire is the other member, she just couldn't be here tonight, so it's good to have those folks on the team. And I'm Jamie Emerson, it's lovely to meet both of you, we're so glad that you're here. We have a lot of exciting stuff going on, so this is the perfect time to join and get going, and yeah, look forward to working with you.
Awesome. I'm Danielle. I currently work for Hart & Hickman in Charlotte, but I live here in Belmont.
Great.
And I'm Becky Carpenter. I've lived in Belmont for almost 2 years, and I work with Wells Fargo. I'm part of the green team for the Charlotte area. So I'm excited to do some things in the hometown.
Great, well, welcome.
Did you already introduce yourself?
Todd Beasley. I started when Sarah came on board,
That's
but
right.
I have not made it in several months.
It's good to see you.
You're so welcome.
Director of Horticulture and Facilities at Daniel Stowe.
My name is Melissa Lockamy. I'm a planner with the planning department here in Belmont.
Shelley DeHart, Planning Director for Belmont.
Marie Turner, KBB liaison, full board member for this group.
I'm Cassidy Lucky, I'm the event coordinator with Parks and Rec.
Me too. Pamela Underwood, I'm a former board member, meeting from when it was originated in 2007. Grateful for the high school students. That was one thing I tried to implement a while back with contacting the high school teachers. Read your agenda, I'm just going to throw it in there, the little Crayola, the crayon, little donation to teach kids to start repurposing, recycling. Loved it because I read over the agenda. Glad to see the art still being continued with the trucks.
Yeah.
Got to revamp and revise and meet the current needs of the citizens, and also a 24-year resident of Belmont.
We're glad you guys are here. So Pam and Marie are kind of like founding members. They kind of helped get all of this started many, many years ago. So we use them as very trusted consultants on this now. All right.
I'm Jamie. Second art for the planning department, and I was just making sure our audio is working.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, guys, for that. So we'll go ahead and call this to order and set the agenda. Hopefully, everybody's had a chance to look over it. Are there any changes or concerns about the agenda before we set it? Everybody's good there? Okay. Then I believe we need a motion to set the agenda.
Motion?
Oh, is that what I sound like? No.
Not at all.
All right, so we got a motion and then second. Okay, perfect, great. We're good to go there. Okay, so we have attached, it feels like forever since we've met, the November 14th meeting minutes. So any changes or updates to that? No? Nope, I'm good. Okay, everybody good? Okay, then we will again make a motion to adopt the minutes. Okay, Sarah? And I'll second it. Everybody good? All right, good. We can check that one off the list. Okay, now getting into the agenda. First up, number 1 is the landscape ordinance update.
Okay, well, thank you again. I'm Shelley DeHart, Planning Director for the city. The city's tree protection ordinance is actually found in Chapter 11, which is part of the city's landscape ordinance. So it's the landscape and tree protection ordinance. So I thought we'd be further along, but I've been having to do some research. My understanding is that an update of the city's tree ordinance has been on the work program for quite some time. The goals that were identified was to strengthen our tree save requirements and also regulatory clarification, and that's for staff and the public. There are sections that the ordinance that, such as the buffer requirements, that you read the language and I scratch my head and I have to try to explain it to someone and I'm having trouble. So it can be simplified, strengthened, illustrations added to help paint the picture, and of course clarification of the tree protection requirements as well. It's sort of convoluted chaos in there with regulations. So our approach in this is, first, it's easy seeing a development come on board and a bunch of trees being cleared is a very emotional thing for members of the community, especially if they've enjoyed it for 20, 40 years, and all of a sudden, we're in a community that everybody wants to live in. We have some newcomers, 2 years and so forth, and a lot of new residents in town where they have to have a place to live, and growth continues to come. So it's about how we are balancing the environment and growth that is coming our way. We thought it was important to move forward with this update was to really evaluate what is happening on the ground, what approvals, look at it as it relates to commercial, multifamily, single-family development, and really take a good look at the outcome. And the tree ordinance went through quite a preparation. We have some members here that were involved that it can be very controversial. You have a lot of players. You have the development community, building community, environmentalists, existing residents, utility companies. So there's a lot of players when it comes to tree protection ordinances. So some of the projects I wanted to evaluate were the built environment under development, with the goal of trying to clearly identify the areas that may need strengthening in it. And of course, this information we need to present to council so we can gain their support. So with that, I'm going to start with a couple of projects that Under development, and again, multifamily, Aberfall Mill, many of you may know where this is. It's in East Belmont, off East Catawba, and Limestone Drive. It's a very controversial project, so a lot of you may have heard about it. 11 acres, 172 units. That was a combination of 3 apartment buildings for 102 apartment units and 70 townhomes. Now, if you read our ordinance, there really isn't a tree safe requirement. It refers you back to the section. It says really you should try to save trees in the floodplain, or it depends on the slope, the topography. So the ordinance was written where the best amount of land, the flattest portion of the lot is where everybody wants to build. It's more economical and makes sense instead of trying to build on a slope. So they want that for development, and you could save floodplain areas, real steep slopes. So we encourage the preservation of heritage trees. Now with the developments, although there's no tree save requirement, we do have a requirement for street trees and landscaping, parking lot shading, and so forth. So with that, I took a look at this site. This was the site of the Aberfoyle Mill. It's cleared, it was a brownfield, there were some heritage trees on site. So it started out with 16 heritage trees, and there was a mix of some evergreen and hardwood trees. They originally were just going to take them all out, and part of this is how you get development. So with this development, we have requirements such as minimum street width. So with this development, we want to make sure that the fire department, emergency services, and there's room for 2 cars and on-street parking. So some of their heritage trees, you can see, are on the interior part of the road. Let's see if I can get an arrow up here. And we required them to widen the street, so some of these trees had to come out over here. We wanted them to widen it, do curb, gutter, sidewalk. There's no sidewalk over there, and make sure that it was wide enough for emergency services. We did get them ultimately to be able to save 6 heritage trees. So after we look at the tree survey, then we start looking at the design of the development. So this development had to plant 92 street trees. So again, it started with 16 trees out there. We were able to save 6, and they have to plant 92 red maple trees. With that, they are also planting some different types of cherry trees as well in the open space area. Some of the trees are planted as shade trees in the parking lot area. So if we calculate up all of the canopy that we gain, and the way you calculate up it depends on whether it's considered large tree, medium tree, or small tree. There is a credit of square footage per type of tree that's granted, and that's how they calculate how you shade a parking lot. So anyway, at the end of this development, with all the trees, we gain back, and again, these are young trees, 2.5-inch caliber initially, except for the trees that were saved. Minimum 8 feet in height, between 8 and 10 feet. We gained back 2.45 acres of canopy. So this was a site that virtually had no canopy, and it's going to take a while to mature, but we're gaining canopy on some of our development. So that's, and 22% of the actual site area. So that's an example of no canopy, and we're getting 22% of the site acreage back. I then jumped to McLean, and I wanted to pick 2 different phases of McLean because the Conservancy on the lower right, we've just finished phase 1. It is partially cleared already, so I wanted to show an example how our tree ordinance works when you have a lot that's partially clear, and then when you have a fully wooded lot, which would be across the street at Overlake. So Conservancy Phase 1, 55 acres, 128 single-family lots. Now, our tree ordinance requires that they save 25% of the existing canopy. So their tree analysis provides the amount of acreage that the site is wooded, and that's 16.9, almost 17 acres. So we start out with 33% of the site wooded. They are required to save 25% of that, which is 4.23. They actually provided a little bit more, 4.31 acres, so 26%. But on top of that, our ordinance requires, again, street trees and yard trees for single-family development. So a total of 279 trees will be planted within that development between the street trees, and there's required one front yard tree and rear yard tree. So if you calculate that out based on the species, we gained about another 6.21 acres of future canopy. You add that to the 26% that they retained, we get a total canopy of 10 acres, 10 and a half acres backup canopy for the future. That's maintaining the initial 26%, the older tree stock, and the newer canopy. So that's about 62% of the original tree save area and 19% of the overall site. Are these calculations making sense? Stop me if you need me to, because it was a math game. The numbers were blurring. Overlake. Now, Overlake's a good example of a site that was almost 100% wooded. So it was an 84.2 acre site for 143 residential lots. And we can email this slides show to you. The existing canopy is over 74 and a half acres. They're required to, again, our ordinance says you have to maintain 25% of that existing canopy. They saved a little bit more, 28%. So we required street trees for their network. That's 341 trees, or equates to about over 10 and a half acres of future canopy. And then yard trees. Now those lots are slightly larger. Based on the lot size, they'll have one front yard tree and they have to have 2 rear yard trees for most of the lots there. I'd say about 90% of them. So we did that math. Total new canopy 16.55. Add that to the existing canopy, we're at 37.57 acres out of an 84-acre site. That's about 50% of the existing canopy and 44% of the site. So that's pretty good. You have a site return of future canopy of 44%, plus you have 143 new residents in the town, which helps the tax base as well.
Shelley, I have a question.
Yes.
On the future canopy, just in general, is that calculated at what, 20 years, 15 years?
I think it really depends on the species, but I would at least see 20 years. Okay. I'd have to ask a specialist. We were hoping to hire an arborist to help us with this. They are so busy, it was actually hard to get anyone to respond. I think the only estimate we got was like $5,000 to do the calculation. So we took a crash course on how to do the calculations, and but we can jot that question down and get an arborist to.
I was just curious.
I was too, yeah.
Yeah, I would assume it's at full growth, but yeah.
Yeah, that is at maturity. They just use the term at maturity, so I don't know if that's.
Okay, so it's just
20
whenever.
years, 40 years, whenever
all the
they
trees are grown.
consider it's
Okay,
mature,
that
so.
makes sense. Thanks.
So that wraps up.
Sheldon, there's also a covenant in there about
replacement of trees that die within X number of years.
That's
as
correct.
well.
The developers are supposed to replace it. That's correct.
And they're held to that still?
If we know about it, yes. Yes. So what we find is, one area of the ordinance that needs to be strengthened is the maintenance section. So it says that it has to be maintained. Street trees are their maintenance and upkeep is the responsibility of the HOA. So what we find in newly developing type of subdivisions, the HOAs keep on the developers to replace trees in that early time until it's built out and it's turned over to the HOA. But that needs to be strengthened and clarified in that section. So HOAs plan their fees or dues to ensure they have the money to maintain the trees in the future. Sometimes it's a surprise to the HOA to find out that they're responsible. A lot of them think that the city's responsible for the street trees. So we're making sure on all new approvals that the construction plans and the CC&Rs, the covenants that get recorded, have that language in it. So it's provides information to the new property owner. So this one is our most recent clearing, and it was very emotional for a lot of people drive up and down Stowe Road. And as you can see, the site is almost 100% wooded, but this is called Town Square. This was a 28-acre site, or it is a 28-acre site, that was approved by City Council for 83 new single-family lots. They have 27 acres with the tree canopy on there. Now, one thing I want to note about the tree canopy, not all trees are worthy of being saved, you know, and sometimes the lower right-hand picture, are the, I'm going to miss it, loplolly, am I saying that? Loplolly pine, which they grow very fast, but the canopy ends up way up there. At that height, they offer not a lot of shade down below, and then during storms, they break pretty easily. So that's one thing about this site, had a lot of gum trees and these pines, but it doesn't mean you still don't save the canopy. But we try to look at the hardwoods and the quality of the hardwoods when we're evaluating the project. So they were required to save 25%, and it was approved that way. And that equates to 6.77 acres. Well, once a project gets approved, then it goes to construction plan phase and engineering takes place. So what happens quite often is once they start applying the engineering, they'll find that some of the infrastructure will impact what they thought was going to be open space, like the stormwater ponds need to be larger once they do the calculations, or retaining walls and so forth. And that's basically what happened on this project. So they came back to us during the construction plan review process and said, look, your ordinance says if there's conflicts between utilities and such, there's an option to do either plant on site or in lieu fees. Well, we already have them planting all over the place, and we just don't want them shoving trees where they won't really survive. So this was the first time that I'm aware of that we actually utilized that section of the ordinance. So based on the calculations, they owed us 3.47 acres worth of tree save area. So we worked with Public Works and the city manager to say, okay, well, what type of fee do we tie to a tree? And based on, I think we landed at $250 per tree. Then we had them do a special analysis of the most wooded area of the site, like a half acre, and then multiplied how many trees are in this half acre, multiplied it out, for 3.47 acres, there's 250, and they made a payment to the city for, it goes into a special tree account of $46,800. Now, that fund is restricted for tree replacement to further our urban forestry program. So, for example, at Kevin Lofton Park, some of our very large mature trees died. Well, we're using funds from there to replace that tree and replace trees that are more in locations that are more fitting that the public can enjoy, whether it's a park on Main Street and so forth. So we had 3.30 acres, we had a payment in lieu of, well, then we started adding the street trees and the yard trees required. We add those canopies, that canopy in, we're back up to 7.29 acres with the canopy. And again, only 3.3 is existing canopy, new canopy makes up the difference, but that equates to about 27% of the existing canopy or 25% of the site. So we ended up back to the 25%, some old, some new, plus $46,000 in mitigation. So I'm going to show you an example of a commercial site. What I'm finding on more of the commercial sites or some of the infill sites like Aberfall, we are actually gaining canopy because it's cleared and impervious. There's no trees on these sites. They're being repurposed and redeveloped. This particular site is on Wilkinson Boulevard. This is where the new car wash is and the ABC store in that South Fork station. So it was an old mill location, almost 100% impervious. It's 6.4 acres. There was some existing hardwoods on the property. They were located more up front. They were removed to accommodate a 10-foot wide multi-use path. That's where it needed to go, and so they were removed. So with commercial developments, again, there's encouragement to retain heritage trees, but we don't have a 10% minimum and so forth. So how trees get replanted on commercial side is shading for parking lots, any street trees that would be required. In this case, there was a required buffer between the residential development in the back and the commercial development in the front, and just some general landscaping that they had to do around the site. So the tree planting that occurred on this developed site equated to about 1.14 acres of future canopy, or 18% of the site. You'll find a lot of ordinances out there, and I'll show you in a few minutes. When it comes to a commercial site, I think the largest I've seen is 10% for a commercial site. And so we did get a little bit more than that. Now, we do struggle, I have to say, we do struggle on infill sites like this on Wilkinson, especially on the north side of Wilkinson, because technically this commercial development should have a row of trees adjacent to the street, a 10-foot multi-use path, and then more trees behind the sidewalk before the building. On Wilkinson, on the north side of the street, there are utilities that are in the space between the multi-use path and the sidewalk. They're existing utilities. I think it's fiber that's there. So when that occurs, we have them plant the required trees. We haven't put them in the buffer area, but we find other locations for them. But we struggle with achieving that cross-section that's required because in an existing condition like this. So those are some examples of multifamily, single-family development. Now, we wanted to show you differences in some other tree ordinances. So what was interesting is the City of Belmont's ordinance is written where we require that single-family developments maintain 25% of the existing canopy. If you go down the list, you'll see that there are other jurisdictions, they do it by site size. So, for example, Matthew says 20%. So they say if you have over 20%, 20% of more of canopy on your site, you should try to save that full 20%. If you have less than that, of course, you make it up with planted trees. They let you count their street trees and yard trees towards that. Indian Trail, 20% of the property area. And these are typically for lots that are a minimum of 15,000 square feet or larger. Okay. You'll notice Matthews has 15% below it. That is because once you hit their minimum lot size below 15,000 square feet, they'll let you save less, because that means it's a more tight urban development. And then the second row is when you have developments like Eagle Park, where it's a real compact, it could be single family or multifamily, whether it's apartment or townhomes. And that's where our ordinance is lighter. As you can see, there's none really, except we do require, again, street trees, and if it's single family, it would be yard trees as well. Matthews is 15%, Indian Trail's 15%, Huntersville none, Mount Holly none. Mount Holly doesn't require any tree save. They do have a requirement for yard trees and street trees to make up their canopy, but they don't have a tree save requirement. And of course, you can see City of Charlotte between 5 and 10%, and that is based on how much they already have out there, whether it's 5% or 10. So our ordinance is unique in that it requires 25% of the existing canopy, and not just the lot size. Most of the jurisdictions require street trees. It varies on whether there's a yard tree. And of course, the percentage goes down on whether it's a commercial or mixed-use development. But it's interesting, Matthews, they have a range 12 to 5%. They only require 5% if it's in their historic urban core, because they have a quaint downtown like we do. So it's very compact, very walkable. There's not that much room for trees other than tree wells in your sidewalk. So they depend on that to provide the canopy. So that's a little overview. Do you have any questions about that? I know it's a lot of information.
Yeah, I guess going back to some of the history for how the 25% of existing canopy was set, is there any reason why we didn't look at setting a minimum just overall percentage of property area for both single-family residential and then also commercial and multifamily?
I wasn't here when the tree ordinance was developed. I did hear it was a very controversial, it went back and forth, and it ended up being more of a compromise. It was a lot stronger initially. A lot stronger, and by the time you get all parties to the table and negotiation, it also depends on the direction of your city and your city manager, your city council, who directs how, if there's a real push for economic development, you can see it might be weaker in the commercial area, and so forth. But although ours is 25% of the existing canopy, what I really, again, found interesting is I started looking at it going, well, do we actually gain more, especially on all wooded sites? You got to save 25% of your existing canopy, plus we're going to make you do street trees, plus we're going to make you do yard trees, and you can work it to get it back up, and I think I better wouldn't, because that would mitigate it. Like Overlake, we ended up getting 44% of the site.
Can I interject on Overlake?
Yes.
Since Dan and I put boots on the ground and we go tour these homes and
Okay.
these developers, I'm pretty sure, I don't want to say exactly why I know, why probably the percentage went up, that you do have the pump station, that they definitely left that canopy around that pump station. So there are some desired lots that if you wanted a backyard to back up the trees, it's not real deep, it's not a lot of foliage, but they also decided to preserve, oh, I can't tell by that topography, I know that's phase one, right up on that little hills where they found the slave
Yeah,
graveyard.
yeah.
And they did make because nobody wants to live poltergeist in reality, it's a good movie, but.
Yeah, they came across the graveyard in.
And they have it, for those of you that are interested in history like myself, you can see that it's the orange mesh. They've got it blocked off, and in that added percentage, because of the pump station, definitely believing that surrounded. And then you go up there, and I don't know how much of the property was identified as slave graveyards, but I think that was one of the things that was added. And those lot sizes are a little bigger than the one across.
That's correct, they
Caldwell.
are.
What was that name called?
Conservancy.
Conservancy.
Yeah, the lots are smaller, so each house you'll get 2 trees, you'll get 3 per lot over there. We did not count, in these developments, we didn't count the trees. For example, they have landscape buffers along their frontages, and they have planted trees there. We didn't count that. We wanted to see if we applied our ordinance, what did we get on the streets, what did we get in the house, and how much for the homes, and how many do we actually get in tree save. So, I was really surprised. I really didn't think that we were gaining this much canopy back, because again, it's very emotional. You go see out there and you see these bulldozers just doing their cut, and so I was surprised on some of the findings. And again, I do think we are benefiting on the infill and repurposing of sites where we're actually gaining canopy where there is none. So that is redevelopment works in our favor, especially at the old mill sites.
Can I-
Yes, absolutely.
Can you rephrase your question so I make sure I interpret your question right, because I want to
Okay.
dialogue off that.
Yeah, I was just questioning why we looked at just setting a percentage of existing versus setting a percentage of the total site.
Site, right.
Yeah, like it seems like most of the other cities have done.
So what I'm hearing in a different manner is that the focus on the trees is really an individual tree versus the fact that trees really appreciate plant communities better than
Yeah.
just trees. And so my question, going off yours, is why is it looked at just single specific areas versus saving a percentage of the green space of the property versus cutting everything down around one single tree? And then the second tier of that question is looking at your plant list, and you're assuming these trees are going to reach this desired
Maturity,
canopy,
yeah.
but in actuality, looking at a list, I'm not sure who agrees upon that list, but you have, one, a significant lack of diversity with those trees. You're on that one list where it was several hundred trees, you had 5 different species, and of which 2 of them are terrible selections for streetscapes. When you think about the thermal updraft that comes up from the asphalt, and the fact that there is no oversight with the landscapers in their planting techniques.
And how they plant and how they prune it, yes, absolutely.
So I don't know if that falls under your purview, or is that a totally different
Well, I'm going to get
jurisdiction?
to that as one of our weakness in the ordinance, because, again, we went through this and I can't say why. This was the city's first tree ordinance. I heard it was controversial, got watered down, but the council did approve it. So now we're starting to see, when we apply it, what we're getting. Whether I can tell you a weakness of it is we have a tree list that you can pick from. I don't really know where it came from. I'm assuming it was part of the.
It's not a tree.
Okay, that it was part of the process. And we only require a 6-foot wide landscape strip between the back of curb and the sidewalk. And they'll want you to plant a large tree in there, an oak tree. in there. And we are seeing some of the results now, 10, 15 years later. We were contacted by a neighborhood where they planted these huge oak trees in a compact neighborhood, and I was shocked when I drove down the street. The limbs are like inches away from second-story bedroom windows, and it just wasn't the right species for that area. So that's a weakness we do want looked at, is review our tree species list, find out which ones are better for street trees, get that cleared up, what size is 6 feet wide enough for a landscape strip. Other cities have like 9 feet. I was looking at DOT's regulations along their street. They measure it a little different. So it needs to be looked at.
I think for the urban renewal part, taking an existing urban site, there's a difference there between taking, the other sites that you showed that are already wooded and the tactic that could be changed for those types of sites. But I think to your point is that there's a focus on just single trees versus the community of trees, and how the benefits are a lot stronger with a community of trees in proximity to each other versus a community of trees that are spaced out that you're calling the streetscape.
Okay. So saving the tree save area is more important than worrying
I would say
about
the
the tree.
value holistically for a green space within that percentage of acreage is stronger than the calculation that you're coming up with from the Kennedy from
Adding the
individual
yard, the
trees.
street,
Right.
and the trees.
What is the name
Okay,
of the book?
that's
I just read the book about what you're talking about. He's exactly right. They're changing their whole theory. Even the forestry's changing how they even treated trees in the forest. And what do they call it, apering? Or what do they would do to them, that trees do better in communities and they're healthier and they last longer, other than because their roots, like somehow.
So
There's a book out
saving-
about that. I was reading it with book club, and I can't remember the name of it right now. And it really changed my whole perception of how you even view trees and how they function and work together, and a weak tree is fed by the healthier trees, and he's right, it's a whole new perception of how to view even forests.
So just focusing on.
He's right, okay, when you strip the canopy completely, and then you have all these single trees.
It's not even counting any of the others.
I think there's an opportunity for both.
For both?
Depending on
Okay.
but it's the balance of the development versus the economic sides, and I get that, but, I think this goes back to one of the original meetings that I was involved in, the first go-around, when I posed the question of that development on, right at the bridge that you informed me was actually Cramerton versus Belmont, but everything was removed. And that was a significant impacting detrimental issue to that riverside property. And so Belmont has a great opportunity to go progressively beyond just looking at single individual trees and really push the agenda of a real, true treescape and urban forest.
Okay, well, I'm going to keep going. We're going to add your comments on there, and so, again, I just want to clarify that, the biggest difference that we noticed in the ordinance is, again, ours is a percentage of existing tree canopy versus a percentage of the site you need to preserve. So if it's 100% wooded, you save 25% of that wooded area, the existing, and then the other is just extra. So that's something I think you're right on the forefront moving forward. We also need to consider and this is where tree ordinances really struggle in considering conflicting wants. We want good connectivities, which a grid system, so our ordinance prohibits cul-de-sacs, and we want all these streets with curb, gutter, sidewalk, good drainage. We have stormwater retention, detention requirements, which serve a purpose with development as far as help filtering out the water before it gets released, and as well as slowing down the release so you don't get this rush of dirty water going into the neighboring properties. Of course, economic development, how do you balance the tax base? I mean, if growth is coming, we have private property owners who are taking advantage of the economy, the growth. We got to strike a balance on all of that. So there's a lot of wants and needs that we continue to deal with. Ordinance weakness. So this is just some of the stuff that when we apply it, we're really struggling with, and we try pushing the envelopes with the developers, and sometimes we get it, and sometimes we don't. We always try to bluff. But right now, there's no requirement to record tree save easements on plats. So, you know, they proposed a tree save area and the open space area, and it's developed out that way. But, you know, in the future, they decide they want to build an amenity center with, you know, a pool. The community really wants it, and there's nothing to help protect the trees. If you had an easement, you could provide a relief where it has to go through a process, such a permitting process, where they might be able to mitigate it or something. Or maybe the trees just aren't worthy. They get disease and they start dying or something. You want to let them go through a process to add some relief. So that's something we notice. It's also for the purpose, some of the developments will save a tree stand that may back some residential lots. A lot of times, we require like tree plantings in the yards, and there might be a tree save area in the back of lots. If you don't record it as any kind of tree save area, when you buy the property, you wouldn't know, well, yeah, I'm going to build a patio out to the back, and I want my outdoor fireplace, and, you know, start going into the tree. So it sort of provides information to the residents as well. We believe that, of course, we definitely need strengthening and providing minimum tree save areas for commercial multifamily development. That I think we need to strengthen. Our buffer section in our landscape ordinance, it needs to be completely reworked. It's very vague, confusing. Our tree size, the right tree in the right place, the right tree species is something, again, as you pointed out, is very important that we need looked at. And again, look at the whole issue of can we be progressive enough to get a buy-in for percentage of the site versus the existing tree canopy. So we've heard a little bit about a few thoughts on the problems with our ordinance. I wanted to get some feedback as we continue to move forward from the board based on some of the information I provided. Again, it's a lot of information. I do want to point out that, so at our council meeting, one of our council members wants the whole tree ordinance brought to the council retreat. The council has an annual retreat and talks about city issues and directions, and it's really the formal start of our budget process. So it's been requested, city manager talked to me about it. What the city manager recommended is, you know, get your feedback back tonight, identify those key things you'd like to see changed. We'll present it in a formal request at the retreat, which is in 2 weeks. It's on the 26th, I think, 25th, 26th. So 25th, 26th, and get council's buy-in and direction. I also want to mention It's on your agenda for later on, but there's an opportunity for an urban forestry grant. This grant, I believe, was used in the initial writing of our ordinance, and I went to the website and I noticed that they will allow for updating of your ordinance, so support that. It's a 50-50 match. It gives us funding that where we could hire experts. We would form a steering committee with some members from this board, from the community, interested parties. Great. On that board, we invite the building community, the utilities, as well as development community as well, to be part of this group, because at the end of the day, we need to be able to take something through that we can say, we've had the steering committee, everybody's represented, they've talked about it, this is a draft we worked on together, we've had it reviewed by the specialist, he's guided us, and it just really helps us get something through the system. So we want that council buy-in, hopefully some funding. We talked about the retreat, and if the board wants to make that recommendation that we even apply for the grant, that I can present to council, get their nod on that, because there's a 50% match. We do have some funding in the tree fund that we'll have to ask council if they would let us apply it to the grant. It's unknown, because I think it's preferred for actual tree planting to grow the canopy, but this is a very important, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. You guys, I'm sure you want to give a formal recommendation to take it to council.
I didn't want to jump in, Brad, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think some of the things you've already touched on, it seems pretty clear that we need to add some requirements for commercial and multifamily type developments into the ordinance. I think, the issue we had discussed, revisiting the 25% existing versus just setting a minimum overall percentage of the site, or potentially some combination, whichever is greater. I think that needs to be reevaluated. And then I'm sure this could take us on a whole nother tangent, but have we looked at offering any kind of incentives for development of brownfields, so that we're not just looking at removing existing canopy with the sites, like you mentioned, where we're actually adding canopy?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything in our ordinance currently that offers incentive for redevelopment of a brownfield, because it's very costly and timely for developers. If they choose to do it, they usually have done it before and they know the system. Our ordinance does have some incentives. I believe if you preserve heritage trees, you get some relief here and there. What I find with tree ordinances, and I've been doing this a while, is the incentives, not a lot of developers actually take advantage of the incentives. Doesn't mean you can't have it in there. Yeah, because they're typically just trying to do the minimum. So it's more important to have those good minimums and still have it in there in the event somebody's really wanting to go. But yeah, I don't think I've ever processed a permit for someone.
Yeah, that's not going to, that's not going to, help them make the decision or change the decision.
Right.
Yeah.
So the parts that you put in there, acknowledging some of the weaknesses, how is that going to be brought forward in the next stage of the process? How are those going to be remedied during the retreat, or is it coming back?
Well, okay, so it was requested by a council member that it be put on the retreat, or on the agenda for the retreat. The plan was to get a formal request from this, identifying areas that you'd like strengthened. And we've talked about some in general, and I'm sure once we get in there with arborists and some of our committee members, we'll discover a lot more areas. But we want their buy-in because we need funding. to get the expert. Luckily, the timing with the grant is perfect. The grant is due in March, so we'll have to work quickly to get the grant. But I think it would give us the most expertise in a process that will help us reach our end goal. So at the retreat, the plan is just to present a formal request, if that's what this group wants to do, identify the witness, talk to them about the grant. And if council says not interested, well, that pretty much closes it up right there. I don't foresee that. I think they're definitely going to let us move forward, but we do need funding to get the expertise that we need. And then from there, if they say yes, we'll apply for the grant. Doesn't mean we can't start forming a committee to start looking at the ordinance and really, I think we have a great asset right in our audience here that will really help us identify it. I'll be emailing. Have you looked at our ordinance? Let me ask that.
It's been several months.
Okay, I was going to say, I'll email it to you. So we could get that, so when we do get the consultant on board, we have our wish list, we have a committee, because it does have to be a stronger grouping to, if we just take something there, and that's my understanding what happened the first time, is they wrote the ordinance without really having multiple disciplines involved, and it didn't go well, and they had to sort of step back and work on it.
Had developers,
You did.
and developers, we did have the developers.
You did have the
And that's where we were
Commercial as well.
advised to hit them with, fines are just gonna be passed down to the people who buy the homes, like some of the freezing of the permits. But we had that grace period of the downturn economy, so therefore a lot of things stagnant in Belmont.
So they wanted development.
But no one was doing anything. We watched the house move years, 10 years before here's to you. We all knew it was coming, and then I just think the ordinances weren't tight enough. I mean, it didn't change in city council, and development hit Belmont fast and furious, and it was a lot to keep up with. I mean, I commend you guys. You have your hands full. You have a lot of development. You have this huge staff to handle all of this, and I know everyone's really trying to do the right thing. But it was, that was the whole, because Adrian Miller started, this is the tree ordinance.
Right,
And
yeah.
I still have the
He
original
planned.
documentation, and the whole thing, his whole passion was preserving the canopy of Belmont. And with that young, comes, like I said, we got that grace period, then the economy picked back up, and then development came full force. And it came quick, and it came with the bulldog. And I noticed that Morgan's Branch, or what do we call it? I know, it's just like,
Yeah, Morgan's, well, that is, I did not study that one on purpose, because that, I tried to stay away from projects that received a special, unique approval,
yes.
such as they were able to pay an inland fee for open space, or that one was
Yes.
supposed to be like an LID development with these little lots with no sidewalks or infrastructure, so that, I don't even know where to start.
I understand. I can tell, I can drive by there, and I understand.
Yeah, so there's a lot with that one. I tried to look at ones that I know went through the process, and we actually
Yes.
applied the ordinance. And
Yes.
it wasn't originally approved under, I did look at Belmont Town Center because it was originally approved 10 years ago.
Exactly.
So that would have been a good model, because the tree ordinance was.
And the grocery store selection changed several times before Harris Teeter actually landed.
So,
And I'm not on the board, but you are correct. It just, from my being involved with this for so long, is that the whole theory of canopy is community of trees. And it's called the hidden life of trees. And it's on the New York Best Time Sellers. And it will change your theory about trees like this.
Kelly, I would just, for your all's consideration, one
Yes.
of the gaps I see that needs to be strengthened would be the sustainment, oversight, governance ongoing by the city, as well as report out
Our
of
staff
that.
and resources.
yeah, that was something, yes. Even our current ordinance, I was shocked to read, I never knew this, that they're supposed to apply for a permit, commercial development, supposed to apply for a permit just to maintain their their trees, I don't think our office has ever issued a permit to make sure they're trimming their trees properly. And, you know, in theory, that's absolutely great, but businesses change their landscapers, sometimes there's corporate, they don't know to read our ordinance. Again, I was never told that we issue permits on an annual basis to our commercial developments to ensure they're cutting trees. Now, if we see people, you know, doing crepe murder, I guess is what they call it, we will stop by there and we'll talk to the manager of the business and bring a section of the ordinance and so forth. Melissa worked really hard on, and she continues to monitor the CVS here, the CVS, right? Yeah, at Park Street, because people keep running over the trees and knocking them over, and they weren't maintaining them, and so she did a good job with that and code enforcement and getting it back up, but we have to keep our eye on it.
So there was a tree that had removed, they had to replant, so we did keep an eye on it, we didn't share the thing.
But it has to be, it really needs to stand out before we notice it, because we don't just drive around looking at the landscaping, and she did a lot of research to find the original plan to even know one was missing. We wouldn't know if we're new here, so, yeah, if you really want to do the governance of it, it's going to take more staff dedicated to doing that type of thing, because unless it gets reported to us, we really don't know.
Is your information containing this Belmont Land Development Code? Is that what? Okay.
Yes, Chapter 11.
As adopted 10/4/2010?
So I guess what I'm looking for is direction from this board to, information to provide to the council at the retreat. I'm making a lot of assumptions, but. So I'm looking for formal requests from this board to identify that it's the board's recommendation, our landscape ordinance, or excuse me, our tree ordinance, or tree preservation ordinance be updated and possible apply for the grant to get the expertise. We think it needs to be strengthened in the areas we talked about, and we will type that up and present it to them and keep this moving forward.
Okay, do you just need that in a verbal recommendation, or do we
Please.
need to like do a letter with the bullet points that we
No, you
talked
can
about?
just do verbal, it's in the minutes, we can
Okay.
present the minutes, and staff will present it in their
So I think
PowerPoint.
we had talked about the review of the tree list and what's on that, reworking the buffer section, the tree ordinance being brought to the council, adding some more information around commercial sites and reevaluating the 25%.
Site versus existing, yes.
Yeah, site versus existing, yep. And then also just the enforcement piece too, which we've talked about, you know, for a while. We're not blaming anyone by any stretch, it's just, you
And
know.
I'm sorry, also, I think the trees save on the plat, right? Isn't that something?
Yeah, that would be
That's
something we
something I
would throw
think-
in there,
Yeah, for the
Uh,
continuity between owners.
Great,
Things.
yep, thank you. I knew I'd missed something. And then I think the other piece would just be, you know, applying for the grant. And then I just wrote a personal note here on adding staff to the planning department. As well, so I'll make a motion for the recommendation. It's my second.
Second.
Okay, everybody agree?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So unanimous.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate your patience on this, trying to get to this point.
And thanks for presenting this too. I learned
Yeah.
a lot just reading through this. It's also helpful when we're in the community and people are, you know, chewing on our ears about this. This is super helpful for us to not just go, yeah, it sucks. I mean, you know, to have some information to help educate everybody else. I think just much broader than just environmental topics, just in general, I think now that we're in the age of Facebook and all of that, anytime the city does anything, it's crazy how, and I'm including myself in this, how uneducated people are on how things work and what all goes into budgeting and planning and all those kinds of things. So I think that having this for our benefit is super helpful, so thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so in the effort of time, I kind of want to still finish everything up, but do it quickly.
Yeah.
The next two items kind of go together. So
Okay.
Arbor Day Festival and the trash truck art contest. I put donation and / Goodwill station. So the last meeting, we said we wanted to really talk about what we wanted that to look like. Did y'all think about how we want that component to
And then you
look
had a
like?
baby.
Yeah.
We can add it to next.
Not that it's your
month's
Yeah, I was like,
agenda.
how about you give us a chance to connect on that
Yes,
and
okay.
report
I'm
back at
adding
the
that
next
to
meeting?
month's, With that,
And then-
I reached out to parents
Yeah.
to invite them
I'm not sure
to
that you
next
have those
month's
updated.
ESC meeting to really focus on. Okay. So we have Cassidy here too, because we kind of ran through this spreadsheet this week to kind of update everybody. So for our new members, this spreadsheet that we handed out is our work plan. If there's anything on that list, either tasks or
Sometimes texting.
business vendors or potential sponsors that you think you'd be able to help out with, or have some potential connections that we can use, you can email that to me, or just, tell me what you want to help out with, and then I'll add your names to the list, and we can move forward with that. So for the trash truck art contest, I don't know why we didn't think of this, or maybe we did, and I just completely missed it. But we already do an art contest for the Arbor Day Festival as it is. I was thinking, why not just use those winners and feature them on the trash truck instead of holding two different contests? Did we talk about that, or is that something y'all would be interested in, and I just wasn't paying attention?
I think originally we were trying to push this through a little faster, so
Yeah.
I think that originally we were trying to have that done before we ever got to Arbor Day, and so I don't know if that's gonna happen, but no, we hadn't talked about it because we were gonna
How do
try
y'all
to
feel about that, as far as, because right now, the winner gets a gift card or some type of certificate, and then we recognize them at the festival. When we originally talked about the trash truck art contest, we were gonna recognize that winner at the festival as well. So I was thinking about it today, and just having that winner scan their artwork in and get it digitized and not be the wrapping of the truck. It's a lot bigger than a $10 gift card or something like that. But we could open it up to all ages, including high school, because right now it's mostly elementary schools.
It's always been in high school, and I couldn't get a response.
Oh, okay.
If I showed you the poster from 2007, you'd be agreeing with envy how beautiful. The art teacher retired, so there's been a change of guard.
Okay.
So no, it's always been
Okay.
opened up to all three levels.
So that's good, and we can do different, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but, different brackets, so elementary school winner, a middle school winner, and high school winner, and all three pieces be featured on one side of the truck. And then if we really want to, the other side of the truck could be something graphically designed by a professional, or something like that, but just wanted to get your thoughts on this. If we want to combine them, or if we still want to do two separate
You
contests.
could actually do a reveal at the Arbor Day, have the truck there with it already wrapped. That would be fun, to let the kids see their artwork on the truck at Arbor Day, get their photo, the paper next to the truck or something. That would be fun.
Can we pull that off in time? How long does it take to wrap a truck?
To wrap a truck, I talked to Jamie Campbell, and she said that they can get it done. They're ready to get it done. They're just waiting on us.
You probably
As far
would need
as-
to have the artwork done just a little sooner,
Yeah.
I know usually run right up
To
to
it,
near
yeah.
the event, but if you got the winners
Yeah.
identified earlier,
So I'm thinking
started
like
a little
end of
earlier, you
February.
could pull it off.
If we just made the end date like end of February, get everything out.
We could probably get a company to sponsor it, so we don't have to pay for the wrap as well.
And it's crisp printers is usually, so you're thinking about, it is very affordable, because I'm looking at to have our new high school sign done that way. I was like, wow, that's all?
So yeah, it is an opportunity.
I think as long as we could scale it well, if it's like a drawing on a
Yeah.
8x11 and then you blow that up, what's that
Yeah.
ultimately gonna look like?
So I'm sure between us and then the
I think
company that wraps it,
I was
kind
gonna
of
say,
way
it
to do
would
it.
depend on your scanner
Mhm.
quality that it gets scanned in.
As I said, the technology's there, I think we can make it work.
You might could put like a size requirement on the art submissions, like that they be at least this
Yeah,
big.
Absolutely.
Or like the right dimensions where it'll scale up.
Yeah.
Didn't we do that with the?
Yes, we did,
Yeah.
for digital submissions.
Okay.
For the ones submitted by the students, so they're usually either Crayola.
Yeah, that's true.
So, you gotta find a way to scan them and blow them up.
Okay.
A question that I have about that is with the truck, we had been talking about having it as a certain theme. Would we
I
have
think the
to?
theme would stay.
Yeah, so but that would mean we'd probably have to do a theme on the competition as well. Would that have to go into like how well they represent the theme as part of the competition as well and add more layers to it? Or would that just be keeping it the same and then picking the artwork from the stack that we still get?
So what they've done in the past is they're just a general like recycling theme. But you all would be selecting winners. So it's kind of up to you if you want to make that the number one thing that you're basing the art submissions on, is how well they follow the theme. We could, generate a scorecard and say, based on theme, 1 to 5, overall quality, 1 to 5, that kind of thing.
I think in the past, because it was a tree board, we tried to make sure the art showed the importance of trees in their artwork. But again, this is recycling as well, so I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, the theme that they came up with was,
The contamination.
eliminate contamination.
Yeah. So in the past, schools have dropped off their artwork, so we have the actual, painting or picture drawing in, and we just pick a day, and the whole board comes in, and we just, basically write down on a piece of paper who, each of us
Our
thinks.
favorite or-
Who
okay.
our favorites are, and then those are awarded that way. So it's a fun, thing to be a part of.
The theme was eliminate contamination.
It's going to be really interesting what the elementary and middle school interpretation of that is going to be. Yeah.
Are you going to expand or are you still going to keep it since it's Belmont Cramerton? Because we just normally contacted those schools within our communities. You're keeping it that scope.
That's what
Probably
we talked-
reasonable.
Yeah, yeah.
I know the art teachers personally, especially have.
Are you volunteering?
Definitely, I'm disappointed in the high school.
One thing on the Arbor Day I wanted to add, I was responsible for getting all the scouts organized, so the Girl Scouts are definitely on board. And I've reached out to the Boy Scouts and I haven't heard back, but I'll keep at the Boy Scouts. But if not, we will have enough Girl Scouts because we've got like at least 20. So we're gonna have Scouts galore. Whether their boys are there or not, and they'll all be in their cute little uniforms.
So what do you guys think about merging the two?
That sounds like a good idea. Efficiencies where we can get them.
Perfect. Okay, so I'll merge it all together. I kind of did a draft of flyer for the festival, but I gotta figure out how to make this work.
Perfect. I was kind of waiting on something to be able to reach out and share.
Cassidy,
just
you
like
wanna
any
talk
kind
about
of
Facebook and website?
marketing flyer or something.
At this point, we've got a save the date type Facebook event page up at the moment.
Oh, nice.
We've got
I could put that up.
our organization and.
Yeah, just put
Okay,
that.
and
I'll
Cramerton
bring it up
listed
on
as
my
co-host.
computer here.
So we just got the basic.
Oh, I'm trying to pull
information
up
now.
the flyer.
Okay,
Yeah, so I'll pull it up.
in the Facebook, okay.
Yes, my brain just froze on how to get it.
I don't want to conflict.
But we've got limited information up on our special events page on the city website as well as the Facebook event page. So as we sort of gather more details, vendor lists, things like that, we can add to the list or set up.
It's Plain Wednesday, so it's I was putting the audio from so this is what I kind of drafted as far as a flyer
Nice.
for the event itself. The audio's gonna drive me nuts, hold on. And then the art contest. So I was really hoping you guys would say yes.
Yeah.
Did you put this together?
Yes.
That's very nice.
Yeah,
Yeah,
nice.
it's really good.
Thank you. And then the right side is just what we put on the Facebook page, so simple, but if you're interested, I can send you all the graphics, so you can start posting it and sharing it all your stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Cassidy and I will work together on getting it on the website fully updated and getting some content together to really start pushing it out. And we'll share it with Cramerton as well, like what they did with us last year, to share on their sites. But yeah, if you have any recommendations or anything that needs to be changed, I will gladly take those now, so we can get this stuff out.
I like this.
I think
It
that's
looks
very
really
good.
good. Definitely.
Can't see the letters very well, but it's just because I don't have my big glasses on.
We will take more big posters and then get them distributed.
That's my problem.
online. This area right here, I'm leaving for sponsors, because we're going to try to reach out to sponsors. Cassidy and I talked about putting together a sponsorship packet that we can send out to the list that we have on that last page. I'm getting them on board to help us with this.
Great. That was another one of my questions. I couldn't remember which of the vendors on the list we were planning on trying to ask to sponsor, but you all are taking care of any of
Yes, and.
those. Okay. The others are just, we just want them to come participate, set up a booth. Okay.
Yes.
Got it.
Okay, cool, so that's what I knocked out two things.
All right.
Cradle and recycling campaign. So we are good to move forward with the Cradle and recycling campaign. Shelley and I spoke about getting the funds and getting it all worked out, so it's not a problem to start the pilot program this year. So for the next meeting, I'm gonna bring in bins and then, do you still wanna do stickers with the ESB logo on them for the bins?
Was it ESB or is it just City of Belmont kind of stuff?
Totally up to y'all. The ESB logo is the City of Belmont logo. Yeah. Can you zoom this in? Is the City of Belmont logo with, a little tree inside. Come on. Move. Please. There we go. So it just
Okay.
has-
Oh, yeah, well, that's clear. Yeah, that looks
A
good.
little more. Recycling.
Yeah, that's nice.
So we can get stickers made up on those, and
That's
next
great.
meeting we'll kind of assemble them all together and then talk about
Okay.
distributing them.
Okay.
The other question I had was, do we want some type of write-up to include with the bins to go to the school, or just want to drop them off?
It really depends on, I mean, what would be nice is if we could get Mr. Kessler to come to the next meeting then and be
Okay.
part of putting it together.
Yeah.
Because last time I spoke to him about this was, I think even in
this-
August or
yeah.
something, because we left it with
Yeah.
budget and
Mhm.
that's it. So it'd be nice to bring him back in,
Okay.
because he was very supportive. And he'd probably, we maybe could hand it off to him then.
Okay.
And I don't know, it depends on maybe what the city wants to do. I don't know if you want to go. I don't know that I can take the time off of work to come back to Belmont to do this and then turn around. So
Yeah.
I don't know that I could be present on the day.
I
that
like
you
the
guys
idea
hand
of
off.
having him come to the meeting and, meeting with the board and getting an idea of what's
Right.
going on. Do you mind inviting him?
No, no
Okay.
problem.
So if you invite him, we'll have all the stuff and then we can kind of talk to him, and I don't mind putting together some kind of instructions or like just a little half sheet paper that says
Okay.
what we're doing, how we're doing it. It's already typed up in purpose, so we'll just copy paste it.
Yeah, I think it's something that he could have, a very short paragraph that he could just offer to his teachers at the next teacher meeting. And then, it's just such a simple process,
Yeah.
but the receptionist lady obviously would then be responsible for shipping things out, or whoever he appoints as appropriate staff.
Okay.
But,
Awesome.
It would be nice if you're implementing that program to, in our local paper banner, to get a photo of, within group and a little press release about what's coming in the school, sponsored by the ESB. So again, as you said, educate the public what the ECD is doing.
So the bins, you guys will get the bins, you'll
Yes, I'll
procure the bins.
purchase
Okay.
bins,
Yeah.
I think we said 20 recycling bins based on 20 classrooms. So I'll get 20 bins and 20 stickers for next month.
Awesome. That's exciting. Thank you. All right, so grant opportunities.
So this is the grant that Shelley was talking about, so I wanted to give everybody a copy of it to kind of review. I guess in the motion we made, we are recommending that we apply for the grant. So we'll see where city council looks at it. If they are good with it, then we can move forward and do the application. But I want everybody to have a copy of it, review it. It gives some examples of like what it can be used for, kind of how Shelley was explaining. So if anything pops out to you, jot your notes down, email them to me, and we can move forward.
So that's just kind of our homework, is to review that, okay?
I'm all about homework.
That's fine.
And then the next item was a follow-up item from the last meeting as well. We said we were going to distribute this to everyone. So I included it for everybody's records. This is what we had on file for the Heritage Tree Program.
Which page did that start on?
It starts on page 27.
Oh, okay.
So I kind of made a note, if everybody could read it, provide comments and feedback at the next meeting of what we think is good, what isn't good, and really how we can change it and make it really apply. Because when I was reading it, it's like it's just a designation program. Shelley and I were talking about how can we incorporate an educational component to this. So was it Indian Trail that does
Yeah,
the-
Indian Trail has they call it the Mayor's Tree Initiative, and what they do is they adopt fourth graders, they do an education piece at all the elementary schools during Arbor Day week, and they actually go do a classroom education piece to the kids first on the importance of trees, and then they go out and the kids help actually plant a couple trees on the school campus, and they get this little plaque and they get a seedling, and if they take a photo of them planting it with their parents, because we want to make sure they're just and send it back in, the teachers would put that, print it out, put it on a leaf, and it went on this big tree in the hallway, so the kids could go by and see a picture of themselves planting a little sapling. And it was a very successful program, but it does take a lot of coordination with volunteers, but kids would come back years later and look at the tree that they planted at the elementary school when they were there. So it's really cool.
So extra homework and thinking of different ways that we could kind of beef up this program and make our own program, and hopefully we'll learn more.
And I can give a little bit of context on this. So there is a heritage tree section in chapter 11 somewhere. I don't remember the sub numbers, but this is kind of a build on. So this is not ordinance. This is not forcing anyone to do anything, and it very much reads that way because there's some cities like Seattle and Portland and some of those bigger, more progressive cities have restrictions. So once a tree is in a heritage tree program, you can't, even if it's on your personal property, you can't cut it down without going through, approvals and things like that. So at the time that this was drafted, we knew the city wasn't ready for something like that, so we just didn't even go down that path. So this is very soft and very, just if you want to, and there's, you can do anything you want to with it afterwards. So it's not heavy-handed at all. And a lot of this we pulled from, we had talked to West Hollywood, and they had provided, they had a really kind of great, softer program, and they were really nice partners and let us use a lot of what they had. So that was kind of our starting point, and just other priorities came up, and we kind of got it roughly drafted, and then other, we haven't touched it in a while. So one of our goals that we identified for this year was just to try to get this finalized, and at least get it to council and just see what the reaction is there. Yeah. That's pretty much all I have to say about that.
So that would just be a supplemental program to the ordinance? Or, so the ordinance requires them to do this, this, and this, and then the tree program would just be?
It's completely separate from the ordinances,
Okay.
so it won't be, it's not part of.
More of a recognition.
Yeah.
Kind of
Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
program, if you want to participate.
It's kind of a self-nomination, kind of thing. So
Okay.
if you have a tree, or if you, we have a few trees that we were like, that's going to be on the list, and we'll just contact the owner and just say, is it cool if we nominate your tree? Because they're on rental properties and things. So, but it's very much just self-nomination.
Okay.
And if you have a tree that's really old that you think is special, you can recognize it. And there's been talks too, depending on how this goes. Perhaps we turn it into, if they're close enough to where you can see these trees from a sidewalk, perhaps we do some sort of a walking tour, and you can do the tour of trees and see them. I mean, we'll just have to see where it winds up. So there's different places we could go from here, but yeah, it's very, glad to have that one back on the agenda.
And I'll include it again for next month to just continue our discussions about it.
Okay. And then, any other business? Okay. Motion to adjourn? Sarah, second? Yep, all right, we're done. Thanks, guys.
So Jennifer, I just look forward to your text or email. Usually, it's probably more tight than mine.
No, I was gonna say, mine's way open because I don't go back to work until like February.
Oh,
So
I know, right? I don't do anything.
yeah, I don't want to hear my list.
It's just because